All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from, and welcome to another episode of Spring Office Hours. I'm your host, Dan Vega. Alongside me, as always, is the great DaShaun Carter. How are you, my friend?
Great. I am DaShaun Carter. I don't know about great.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
I'm having a good day. Just the energy over here has been pretty amazing. I am doing a lot with the stuff. I'm enjoying stuff. Like I'm excited. I feel like I got new toys every day. There's a new
Yeah,
release. I got new toys, and I'm having a lot of fun.
yeah. I I've been sharing this stuff out on Twitter lately, and I think it got sparked from an email. Someone emailed me and said like, "Hey, I saw something you said on Twitter the other day, and it was like you you felt like you weren't learning enough, and that made me feel at ease because I'm having a hard time learning." And I gotta tell you, I get paid to work on Spring every single day and learn and teach it to others, and I still like every day. I'm just like, oh, there's so much to learn. Like there's so many projects, there's so many things that you would want to that you might need to build applications with, and I get overwhelmed, and just because there's so much to learn. And so yeah, so I think I wanted to bring that up to just kind of let everyone know out there, like if you're like stuck on something or feel a little bit overwhelmed, don't worry, it's not just you. It's those of us who've been doing it 20 years and get to stare at spring docs every single day. So don't feel overwhelmed.
That's a very good point, and I think that's also, yeah, dear Ted. Let me throw this up there. The more I learn, the less I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and again, like that's this format, what we're doing, we're trying to help. It's okay to ask questions. That's
Yeah.
we're encouraging you to ask questions. So bring them because we understand the struggle is real. Like there's always something more to learn, and cheat codes are awesome, right? If you can have somebody else that's already digested it and can explain it, wonderful. Bring your questions.
Yeah, I will say this too. If you are someone who, and I guess, I mean, if you're in our industry, I think you have to enjoy learning because if you don't, I don't know how you keep up with everything that's kind of going on. Um, I take a lot of notes. So again, the tool doesn't really matter, but whatever tools you use to kind of keep your thoughts together, keep them in one place because I'm working on a new article slash guide with our coworker Mario on serverless stuff. And it's been a little while since I've touched it, but there were times in my career where I've done a lot of research on this. And I went back to my learning notes, and whoa, there it is. I have like two full like documents full of like why you would need it, what you might want to use it for. And I was like, oh, this is a really nice like reminder of what I got into this for. So like if you're learning stuff, keep notes. You may come back to them and find them very useful. So I try to keep all my notes in Notion. I can always go back to them, and they actually really helped out this week. So keep those notes when you're learning new things.
That in itself, that's a good cheat code.
Maybe we'll call this one cheat codes.
So let's say hi to a few folks. Krish, thanks for joining. Um, I can't read it, but thanks for writing in English. Hi, thanks for joining. Uh, Anton, always welcome. Jonathan, hello, welcome. Welcome to the stream. Our favorite Tutor Ted, we're glad you're here. Uh,
Oh, I may have
Go ahead and ask him the question. We
I
have a
I
horn.
already poked him. I may have poked Ted and said, "Hey, would you like to join us one week and talk a little testing with Ted?"
It'd be so good. Like just the thing that I kind of struggle with is like that start. Um, I'm gonna do a hello world, uh, and the normal uh, test that we get is that application context. But then what's next? Like
Mhm.
doing that next test for that next thing, the hello world piece. Yeah, just where to start. I feel like it's sometimes easier to add things when I'm like adding a feature to something that already exists, but starting from scratch. What's the first set? Like, what are the first like one, two, three? Uh,
Yep.
that'd be great.
Yep. And in slice tests, we've talked a lot about those this year on the Spring One tour, just getting into slice tests. But testing with Ted, Ted does a lot with TDD, so I'd be interested to talk to Ted about that. So hopefully we can get him as a guest soon. That would be fun.
Yeah,
What else we got going on? I know you're running a lot lately.
I am.
5K every day.
5K every day. I ran a
You
half
did a half
marathon
marathon too,
on
huh?
Saturday. I was happy.
Wow,
I was only like 25 seconds slower than my first half marathon in 2009 when I was whatever 13 years younger.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, I'm pretty happy
That's
about it.
really good.
Yeah,
And all that after running a 5K every day. So
and still running a 5K every day. Yes,
yeah. Do you count that as your 5K every day, running a half marathon?
I did count that as
It's
my 5K
5K
for the day.
plus every day,
Yes.
right? Well, I brought that up because I was talking to our fearless leader, Tasha, today about a run at SpringOne. And she informed me that we already have something planned. And so hopefully we'll be able to share some more of that in the upcoming weeks. So we have some things planned around a run at SpringOne. So if you're a runner, walker, short, long distance, whatever you want, I think we'll have something for you. So stay tuned to that. Um, Speaking of SpringOne, we have a lot more of announcements coming out tomorrow, I believe. So there'll be some content announcements coming tomorrow. So stay tuned for those. We should have, we announced a lot of our content for SpringOne, but we have some more coming tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. What else? Anything?
No, I'm going to put some questions in the chat. I'm going to ask like what, and I want the audience to respond. Let us know. Give us an idea of where you're at, what you're doing, so that we can better understand what content to deliver in the near future. We're starting to plan ahead, and it's getting exciting. It's a good time of year. Again, we just talked about SpringOne, so there's lots of new stuff coming up, and we're going to want to know, where are you at? What are you working on?
I'm using Java 17, but I get to build out demos, so I'm not in the real enterprise world, which I know lacks, which moves at a much slower pace. So. Yeah, see, 11 for work, 17 for personal projects. That's the norm, I think.
Right on. Yeah, that's good. And I'm going to ask one more question. So yeah, feel free to answer in the chat. Which spring projects are you taking to production? Taking to work. I meant to say taking to production. But yeah, help us understand where you're going.
All right, while we're getting some answers on that, please go ahead and feel free to ask questions about those projects you're working with in spring. We'll see if we can't get to them. I'm going to jump into the calendar for today. We like to go ahead and start off and take a look at the calendar, see what's new in the world of spring, see what's being released. So yeah, we talked about it last week. This is another big week. Whoop, just lost it there. Sorry about that. So yeah, we have a big week. We have a lot going on here. You can see we are on October 18th here. So yesterday we had a lot of Spring Security releases come out, including that Spring Security 6.0 RC1. So that release candidate 1 is to line up with Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. We have one of my favorite new projects, Spring GraphQL. We have a 1.1.0. That's an RC1, again, to kind of line up with new Spring Boot stuff. And as you can see on Thursday, we have a big release candidate in Spring Boot 3.0 release candidate 1, along with Spring Framework 6 release candidate 2. So that is really, really exciting. Whenever you start to see those release candidates, that means we're getting closer and closer to a GA, which should happen next month sometime. I don't know a specific date. Well, actually I do, but I don't know that it's out there yet. But that should happen sometime next month. So excited about that. Let us know. Has anybody done any work with Spring Boot 3, Spring Framework 6? If you had a chance to play around with it, anything that you're looking forward to. Ooh, micrometer. See that? I like that. Yeah, so those are
super
those
good
are
stuff.
the releases for the week. Let me go ahead and hide this and find one more thing that I wanted to look at.
I'm going to throw some of this stuff up here. Our team looking into centralized config for microservices in Kubernetes, and we are on Spring. So Spring Config Watcher is an option. But documentation is not helping. There are too many dots to connect. Are there a working sample for it? I think I'm putting that in my notes here. Benjamin says he is working on a finance app. Looking forward to learning something about cloud-ready apps, especially on AWS. And yeah, this cloud-native centralized config, these are concepts that I think about when I think about like 12-factor, 15-factor applications. 12 factors been around for a while. 12factor.net. I should put that out there in the notes. This is a good place to start. 12factor.net. I think it's stuff that if you're talking cloud ready, you're talking cloud native, this is a good place to start. But also, yeah, they kind of got updated. That's been around since like 2009.
Yeah.
Heroku, I feel like it's like 2009. But it doesn't quite capture everything given what we have available to us today. I like to adopt kind of the 15-factor approach. There's not really a website for it. But we had an episode. I should probably throw that into the show notes. We had an episode on Tanzu Tuesdays about 15-factor apps in Kubernetes, what that does, how that works for you.
Yep. Yeah, so that's the 12-factor plus the extra 3. The 3,
yes.
The 3 for free.
It's just a different way of, kind of checking all the boxes. Like, hey, if I'm going to production, what are those things that I want to make sure that I'm doing in today's cloud native world? But yeah, there's more.
Cool. I also wanted to bring up over on the Spring blog, since we're talking about these new releases, learn more about Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3 and these 2 great talks from DevOps 2022. So there's a talk on introduction to Spring Framework 6 and then ahead of time and native in Spring Boot 3. So these are great, 2 really good talks. I had a chance to go through the ahead of time compilation one already. Really learned a lot in there. And then these are 2 talks from DevOps 2022, which just happened. And if you go over to YouTube and go over to the playlist, there's 240 videos in this playlist of just like pure gold. And they got this up like right away. So hats off to all the speakers who spoke at this conference. Hats off to the conference organizers for getting these videos up right away. It's always tough when you see conference videos go up like 6 months later. Like, I want to learn about this thing right now. And I know they can't always do that. I know it's a lot of the times for the audience that is there, but there are so many good talks here. And there are some like really good, like deep dive sessions, like 2.5, 3 hour long sessions. Our coworker, Daniel, who's on the Spring Security team, pinged me and said, hey, there's a really good Spring Security introduction up there if you want to get caught up on some of the latest stuff, which I, again, am always trying to catch up on all this stuff. So check out that playlist on YouTube. We'll get that added to the show notes as well. There's so much up there. And this is at a really timely fashion because I'm going on a little trip this weekend to a friend's wedding in North Carolina, and I have YouTube Red or whatever they call it, where you can download videos. So I'm downloading a few of these talks and watching them on the plane. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Yes, I have been watching as well. Tons of good content. Do you have a favorite? Do you have one that's kind of top of mind right now for you?
For me, just the one I just watched was the head of time compilation. Just really kind of in depth into like what it is, how it works. I think that like I knew about it. We've talked about it a lot, but seeing how they kind of added that middle AOT processing layer to the build step and like how it actually works, and how those hints kind of help, figure out what needs to be included. I think that was a nice like deep dive into like how that stuff works. So for me, that was really cool. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to like the Spring Security 2.5 hour video. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. I've saved like 10 of them in a playlist, so I can't wait to get to them.
Awesome. One of the things that you kind of mentioned, we've been talking about it for a while. We've taken it on tour. We've talked about Spring Native, the ahead of time compilation. But sometimes it takes a different voice, right? I realize I am way down the list when it comes to being able to present stuff. And yeah, sometimes it takes a different voice. Sometimes it takes somebody else explaining the exact same thing, which is Ted's here, which is why I enjoy watching Ted explain things. Just hearing it from a different perspective sometimes makes it sink in. Again, trying to explain it, there's no bad questions. Ask if there's something that you need help with, something you don't quite understand. That's what we're here for. And if it's not one of us that can present it, we can bring in somebody else to help. But yeah, that idea, I saw a lot of just conversations on the different places where people are asking questions about Spring, and it seems like there's a lot of like references to old information, and people are, oh yeah, it's on the internet, and they said this, and that's what's real. There's also this idea of things change. There's a lot of changes that have come down the pipe, especially since 2019. So yeah, things are changing. It's always good to be caught up on what's the latest, which is why we like to go over the calendar and show you what are the new releases and talk about, release notes, etc. So yeah, bring your questions.
Thank you, App Boy. Appreciate that.
Ah, yes. Sometimes the cover is better than the original.
I don't know about that. That's very rare. But in the world of trying to learn something, I absolutely agree with you. That I got into when I first got into like creating content and really paid content when I wanted to create a course. This was, I don't know, 6 years ago at this point. A lot of people said, well, there's already courses on Spring. You can't create a course on Spring. And everybody will tell you now, now that I know this, but everybody will tell you there's no point in creating that. It's already out there. And it's like, as soon as you see something out there and the more of it out there, that's a perfect time to create it, because it means that there's an audience for that content. And as you said, you just may have a particular point of view that may really, strike someone, and they may be able to learn from you better than someone else. Doesn't mean you're a better teacher than someone else. It just means that you connect with that person better. And there are definitely people I connect with that I learn from better than others, and doesn't mean they're smarter. It just means that's who I connect with. So yeah, if you see a video on Spring Boot on YouTube and you're interested in creating a video on that, please do it. Just bring your own kind of unique perspective to it. Change some things up and share your passions, because the world needs more of that.
And it's also a great way to learn, right? You're probably aware for years the advantages of, you talked about it, like keeping your notes. I like to keep my notes public. Writing a blog, the value of writing things down and trying to express it in a way that somebody else can understand it. That's a great way to learn. So yeah, same thing. We had the example, Joe Kim, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Joe Kim talked about Spring Data JPA, right? And we had Greg come on, and I've been using it for years. So it wasn't, I wasn't out looking for content on Spring Data JPA, but I found it and it was amazing, and it has me thinking about things in a different way. So there's all sorts of reasons. I come across hundreds of tutorials on how to do Spring Boot and how to write an API in Spring Boot, a RESTful API. And they're great. And all I understand is that they are learning and they're sharing and they're explaining it in the way that makes sense for them. And I think it's all valuable content.
I forget where I heard this, but I heard that Google has these kind of lunch and learns where some of the managers will require engineers to go off and teach something, once every quarter or something. And as you said, it's a reason to learn something, sure. But if you have to go teach it to someone, you're going to like learn it like a lot more in depth than you would if you just wanted to learn something to do one little thing. Like if I just wanted to create a REST endpoint in Spring Boot, I could learn that fairly quickly. I could follow a tutorial, I could do it. But if I have to go and then teach that to someone else, there's probably not just the mechanics. You need to learn like a lot more, concepts around everything that goes into that, on top of the mechanics of writing a REST controller. So yeah, it's a pretty cool concept. That's why even if you don't want to go speak at a conference, maybe sign up for like a lunch and learn at work, or a local meetup. I don't know about you guys, but our local meetups have like 10, 20 people. We have one tonight. So they're not, it's not like you're speaking in front of 100 people, but it does give you that chance to like deep dive into a topic and really learn it. So
Excellent.
cool. Just digging through some things here. Java and Spring Boot is love. Yeah, the best.
Feel it.
And when you present it, the question that gets asked to push your learning even further, that's a great question. I'll have to figure that out. Yeah, absolutely. There are things that you don't think of that somebody else may have like a use case for, and you're like, and that's okay. And those are that I'm glad you said that answer, Ted. Like you don't have to have all the answers when you present on something. Like you can easily say, that's a really great question. I don't know. I'll take a look at that and I'll get back to you. DaShaun and I do it all the time. So
That's
it's
what we're here
okay not
for.
to know everything.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a couple of answers for some of the questions that have come up.
All right. I'm gonna take a few minutes and show something off. If you want to dig through questions and
Awesome.
put those together, I will bring this up. And actually, let me go ahead and find the video as well. So I just published a video yesterday. Let's find this. Let's see if we can't get this in here. And there it is. So this is on Spring Boot Azure, how to deploy Spring Boot applications in Microsoft Azure. We talked about this last week, and I just wanted to bring this up again because I think what we did last week is we kind of took a look at our options as far as, how can we get stuff into production? I said this in the video, but I think one of the reasons I've often loved front-end web development is because it's very easy to take something and put it out on the internet, especially today with services like Netlify and Vercel. You can literally drop a folder on there, type in a custom domain, and you have a website out there for everyone to see. And what I've really always loved about that is it becomes very like real at that point. It's something tangible that you can now share with people. And I feel like, I get these questions a lot, and I feel like this is something that's kind of missing from our conversations is like, how do I get this Spring Boot application that I've created out into the wild? It's cool that it's running on my local machine, but how do I get it out into production? So last week we went through a whole list of options. And what I did was I took that conversation and I created this repository. So github.com/danvega/springblog. And this is just a sample application. It's the idea is that, hey, we're writing a blog here. We're going to evolve on this, over the next, probably couple months here. It's just a simple REST endpoint that displays a list of articles or allows you to find one article. But we go into what the application is about. So what are the different components that we're using? And I started thinking about like, what are some of the base things that you would use in an application that you're taking to production? So we are using Spring Web. We are using a Postgres database. We're using Spring Data JDBC. I went with JDBC over JPA just because I've done some work with it lately, and I think it's a little bit easier of an introduction if you haven't used either of them. And it fits these needs just perfectly because there's not a ton of data or anything. So Spring Data JDBC there. We're using Spring Actuator. So if you're going on any of these cloud platforms, you'll want to have Actuator in there so you can get these metrics and analytics. And then we're using test containers. So we are using a Postgres database in production. I want to be able to test that locally against a Postgres database, not something that's not going to be in production like H2 or something. So we're using test containers to spin up a Docker instance of Postgres and test against that. So that's the application. I talk about how to run it, how to test it, how to build for production, where this came from. This came from last week's kind of episode of Spring Office Hours. We have Azure Spring Apps here, but I also want to look at this coming soon. So we built out a list of all the places that we want to go ahead and deploy this to. I'm focused on Azure Spring Apps in this guide right now. We'll figure out how we're going to do this. Maybe we'll create branches for each kind of platform. That's probably what I'll end up doing. But what I want to do is take this and deploy it to different platforms. And all of these platforms have different features or services depending on what you're trying to do, right? So we'll take a look at those. And then in this first one, like I said, I started with Azure Spring Apps because I have an account there through work, and I found, DaShaun was telling me all about a lot of the great features there. And so I wanted to find out for myself, like how easy it was to get pushed up there. And I was really, kind of taken back with how easy some of this stuff was. So this is the app. The video goes into everything that you want to, like how to get started with Azure. I can't log into the portal right now. I'm having something going on with my AD
So am I.
account.
It's not just you.
So it's not on Azure side, it's on our side. But that video will go through everything. And I think this is a good introduction, is to like, okay, what's the bare minimum I need to know to get in there? So we talk about like, hey, you got to create a resource group, and here's like the Azure Spring App section, and here's how you create an app. Here's how you deploy one. The other thing we did is on Azure, when you have an app in there, you can use the CLI to basically deploy that jar file that you create in Spring Boot. But you have to do that manually. So you have to like kind of create the jar file and then manually log into your CLI and push that up to Azure. What you can do is use GitHub Actions to kind of automate this. So I've included a GitHub workflow here that does just that. So anytime that we check code into master, we will go ahead and build that jar file and deploy it to Azure. And again, this is a really good workflow, probably something similar to what you might do in production. Well, not in production, but in production for, like, say, this personal blog project, right? I would do feature branches for things that I'm working on. And when I'm done with that, I would submit a PR. I would merge that into master. That hits master. We build an artifact and we send it to Azure. So just some cool stuff.
So let me ask you a question here. And I think we had a similar question like, hey, I want to help. I love the idea of using GitHub Actions as like a start, an easy way to go and like, hey, yes, let's push this to one of the options, and providing it as a GitHub repository that somebody else could fork or copy, and then they could just plug in their secrets and then hit the go button. Are you open to accepting like different GitHub Actions that will just take the same code and deploy it to different places?
Absolutely. I think, I think that's what I think we may need to just sit down and figure out. I think what he said was, is there a list of issues or features? I think that's what we need to come up with. Here are the issues that we could really use help with, and get those out there. So one of the ones I thought of right while I was recording the video yesterday was, hey, we're actually connecting to the database in Azure in the application. And like, we don't want to do that, right? Like, let's connect to a Postgres database in our local development environment, but we don't have anything set up. Let's create a Docker Compose for that stands it up for anybody who kind of pulls that down. So there's a great first feature of like doing that. We need to put this one into an Azure Spring Apps branch and start working on the other versions of that.
And these
But
are
yeah,
good considerations for teams that are using Spring. Are you setting up your projects, your things? Are you setting them up so that somebody else can easily check them out and get working? Having something
yeah,
like a Docker Compose is an excellent option so that,
yep.
yeah, you can start working locally.
Oh yeah, Flyway too. That crossed my mind as well. Yeah. So anytime we want to go ahead and change it, and again, this project right now is very basic. I don't have a front end for it. I want to create like a front end so it like lists out all the articles. This is very just the start. So I think before I add anything to this project, maybe I'll sit down and go ahead and add some issues and we'll see if we can't get some help from everyone.
One of the
I
things that I
think
found since last week is one of the answers that we got to was that if you can get your application, your Spring Boot application into a Docker image, to a container image, you
mhm,
have tons of options,
yep,
tons of options. And as I was, doing research, I found there are thousands of places where you can host a Docker image. And I like the idea there's a free tier. So like for people that are getting
yep,
used to, they want to take Spring Boot 3 out for a spin, there's tons of places. You can now build your images and take it for a run.
yep,
So yeah, there are tons of options. But beyond that, it's like, hey, what does that look like? So can I do Quay? Can I do Fly? Like all these other options. A lot of them are going to have the very similar step of get it into a container and then
mhm,
build it.
yep.
And a lot of those options are also going to have Terraform or Ansible scripts, other tools that you can leverage to make it even easier as well.
Yeah, and then I think one of the things we were talking about last week was, okay, if I do have a front end for this, do I package it into the application? Do I have this as a separate UI? And then if so, where am I deploying that? Like if I'm on Azure, do I deploy it to Azure Web Apps or do I just use something like Vercel or Netlify, which I'm used to, which would be the same front end no matter what wherever our Spring application is located. So yeah, there's some questions to answer. This is really just the beginning of this journey, but I think um, the biggest part of this is kind of showing you that there are so many different platforms out there for you to be able to use, and yeah. So I think top of mind, I'll work on getting the Azure one into a branch, and then we can go ahead and talk about creating issues for each one.
Yeah, excellent. This is good stuff. We had a question. Hi, do you implement gRPC in Spring Boot? Do you?
I know we can. I don't. I don't have any examples of that.
Yeah, it's a question of what are you trying to accomplish and why? I'd like to get more insight into what you're trying to do, but we had a +1 on that question, I think. Something that I'm gonna take a note, like, hey, is that something that we want to understand? Uh, yeah, there are differences and there are a lot of things to consider when you're deciding on how you're going to interact with your different applications. How to scale a Spring Boot project? I think this is a question that it kind
Yeah.
of comes with like how you go into production. It depends on where you're taking it. So if you're just doing a Docker image, where you land it is going to have a big influence on how you scale it.
Hmm.
If you're developing things that 12-factor or 15-factor app, you're doing things like centralized configuration for your different environments, you can scale hopefully pretty easily. So you have options and it depends. But uh, a Spring Boot app or a Python app or anything, it really depends on how you're setting up your application uh, and in order to let it scale.
Yeah. And then we talk about scaling horizontally or scaling vertically, right? Like you can always throw more hardware at it, but that's not always the answer either. So
Yeah, and another question comes up, is Spring Boot asynchronous by default, like Node.js, or do we need WebFlux?
you answered it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so not asynchronous by default. Like, so by default, when you say if I'm trying to build a web app and I use something like Spring MVC, Spring MVC is blocking. So yes, That's what WebFlux is there for, to kind of mitigate some of the things you may come across in Spring MVC when you're doing a lot of blocking IO operations, like calling a database or calling another service. WebFlux will help out with that.
Awesome. Yeah, bring them. Bring your questions. Bring your questions. That was a good explanation. We got to thank you.
Let's see. All right, let me find.
Can I get the link to the project? Can you throw that link into chat?
Yeah, let me do that.
And since this is kind of what we've been working on, let's.
Oh, I forgot
gonna
when
go
we
ahead.
throw it here on StreamYard, it basically goes to every single platform.
Yeah,
So it's just like,
exactly what we want.
yep. Although I don't know if you noticed my really nice Halloween GitHub shirt.
I didn't even look at it because I was too jealous of that hat.
Yes, I love this.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, a couple more. All right.
Look at this. We got issues already coming in for the blog.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to go ahead and add one.
What do you expect for the next SpringOne event that is coming?
That's an amazing
Great question. So let me do this. We didn't have a chance to take a look at this. Let me share my screen. So SpringOne happening December 6th through the 8th in San Francisco. This is an in-person event, which we're really excited about. I'm excited to be back in San Francisco. It's been a while for me, so excited to be back there. If you go to the website now and you go under speakers, you can see a list of speakers that are here so far. So you can go down and look at all the list of speakers. I thought you could go by sessions too. I'll have to look. But you can come down, click on someone like Jonathan, and we know Jonathan's going to be speaking about observability. So you can see what talks he's going to be speaking about. And then you can also go. So, like I said, we have about 40% of the content up there now. And if this is just 40%, I can't wait to see like the full 100% because just looking down this list of people who are going to be speaking is just like mind boggling to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see this person talk or this person. And literally that's almost every single person on this list. So
Yep.
there's so many great speakers, so many great sessions and topics. I know you and I were both on committees to have to like go through all the submissions, which is really hard. I mean, that was my first time doing that. And I'm just like, wow, there's so many great session abstracts here. So yeah, trying to get through those was tough. But we'll have more being announced tomorrow. And then we also have workshops. So if you're going to be there and you want to kind of take a deep dive into something like, hey, you want to get started with Spring Boot, DaShaun and I have 2 workshops on that on December 6th. And then there's a whole bunch of really great workshops here that you can take a look at. So I'm expecting a really great conference with an amazing list of speakers and sessions. And after I'm done doing my workshop with DaShaun and speaking on GraphQL, I'm going to be in the room with you guys because I can't wait to see all those people.
Yeah, so I'm totally looking forward to SpringOne. Hey, are those things going to be available on YouTube? Eventually, they will be available, but there's so much more. One of the things that I have I don't have the link. One of my first big conference experiences was a friend presenting, and it was so like amazing. You don't get the follow-up questions and all the conversations after when a good presentation, when Josh raises the roof and all the questions that come in after and all of that additional knowledge from the audience. you miss out on that when you just wait for it on YouTube. So I understand the idea of like, hey, yeah, I can't go to that conference. I'll wait for it on YouTube. But this conference in particular, the hallway track, yes, the hallway track in particular for this conference is going to be unlike any other. So yes, the content will eventually be on YouTube, but I definitely, if you have the opportunity, if you have the means, I definitely recommend going to SpringOne. This year is going to be especially exceptional because of Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. We had some other questions about like, hey, how are we gonna reduce the boot image size when we're building a Docker image? Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. We talked about earlier. There's a lot of great sessions on this exact question from DevOps. It just came out. We'll have those links in the show notes. But yeah, this is what really has me excited. All of the things that are coming any day now with Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, that's a big deal. And it's going to be really, really exciting SpringOne this year.
If you're ever curious what's in the new version, I thought you said what's the newest version. So I was going to say, if you always go to start.spring.io, you can always find what the default stable version is. But he's asking what is new in the Spring Boot version, so Spring Boot 3. So yeah, there's a couple really good articles on the spring.io blog on like what's coming, how to prepare for Spring Boot 3, Spring Framework 6. Obviously, the biggest thing is the ahead of time compilation. So this will allow you to build native images. So not for every application out there, but for certain types of applications. We've talked about it in the past, things like CLIs or serverless, where the footprint of the application and the speed, where those things really matter. That is going to be a game changer. So again, I mentioned I'm working on a guide for that now. Hey, I want to create a Spring Cloud function and deploy it to AWS Lambda, and I need that to start up like as fast as possible. How do I do that? And that's what you're doing. That's what we're doing. We're creating a native image that less memory, startup, faster startup time.
Yeah, and a lot of times even a smaller image size. There's another really interesting session from DevOps on making the smaller compressed image sizes as well. So yeah, there's tons of options.
So AOT is a big one. There are a few other. So obviously the biggest, with Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, moving to a baseline of Java 17. So that is going to be required. At the time it was announced, seemed like a big deal. Now we're on Java 19 already. So seems like we're behind already. Not a big deal, but making sure we're keeping the community caught up on Java. I like that because now we don't have to like ask who's still on Java 8, right? We got to get everybody caught up on all those performance updates, security updates that we get for free out of Java, and just all of the new things in Java. So that's a big one, along with Jakarta. So we're moving up the Jakarta world to, I think, 9. I know 10's out, but I think we're going to baseline on 9, I believe. So that means there'll be some different packages, naming packages that you have to deal with. Not a big change there, but this gets us going forward as Jakarta changes. We can kind of get new features. We haven't got new features out of that project in a long time, so it'll be nice to like be able to move with that project and get some changes there. There are some other things like declarative HTTP clients, which is a really nice new feature. There's a great talk by Olga from Spring.io in Barcelona on declarative HTTP clients. So check that out. Yeah, just a whole bunch more. Like I said, there are some really great articles on what's coming. I can't think of everything off the top of my head, but we'll see if we can't include those.
Yeah, your workloads have grown. The entire Spring ecosystem is continuing to move forward. So the big thing for me is the native support, that ahead of time compilation, as being one of the major things that are coming out with Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6, and that's all going to be built in. So the smaller image size, all those things, all those benefits for your serverless workloads, those are part of this new release. And another question was like, hey, when is that going to be GA? any day now. The release candidate is scheduled to be out this week. Spring Boot 3 release candidate 1 will be out later this week, and it will be GA this calendar year, but it's right around the corner. The more of you that go in and try out the release candidates and provide your feedback, the faster that will be.
Yeah. Next question here. Let me go ahead and get off my screen. What is the future of Project Reactor / WebFlux once Java Project Loom comes into LTS? So yeah, so this is a question we've talked about a lot. Project Loom, we have this thing called virtual threads, which came in Java 19 as a preview feature. It's going to be a while before those are kind of in an LTS version, I believe, but you can start taking a look at those in Java 19 as a preview feature. And these virtual threads are meant to be able to create lightweight threads and not be tied to kind of the system thread, right? Or the operating system thread. So that's coming in Project Loom. Go ahead and check out the JEP for that, kind of the story behind that. The question we keep getting is, once that's available and we can spawn all these virtual threads and we don't have to worry about performance anymore, what happens to WebFlux? And I think WebFlux doesn't go anywhere. That is one kind of specific thing that Loom is going to solve, and it's going to solve, hopefully some performance issues with kind of IO operations and being able to spawn these new virtual threads. But there are a whole bunch of things that WebFlux does that is not just related to that, dealing with things like back pressure and being able to just provide that kind of reactive programming model. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think anybody knows like the answer to that, but I think, that is my initial answer. I know that Spring has the Spring team is very much paying attention to Loom. There have been talks. I know Jürgen mentioned it at Spring IO. We do have a story for Loom coming. That we are thinking about Loom. So we'll just have to wait and see. But no matter what, I don't think WebFlux goes away, and that is not going to happen anytime soon. So if you have heavy workloads that do a lot of IO operations to databases, to other services, and you want to take advantage of asynchronous programming, WebFlux is your answer. Definitely check it out. And I said, P.S. I love Project Reactor. Don't want to see it go away. Like I said, I don't think it's going away anytime soon or ever. Well, I can't say ever. Everything goes away at some point, but we'll see.
It's Cobalt. Wait, no, it's still here.
Let's see. What is this? Hey, can someone tell me how Spring and VMware came into being? I remember Spring project was under Pivotal.
And then Pivotal did get acquired by VMware back in 2020, I think is when it was official. And somebody said, hey, I think VMware is no longer owned by Dell. VMware is currently independent. So yeah, that's how it happened. VMware acquired Pivotal back in the day.
I have another question. How do you validate an object that's sent through an API that the one requesting owns it without Spring ACL because it's overwhelming?
I'm going to try to understand that. How do I validate if you send me an object? How do I validate that you own that object on my side? Typically, and I'm thinking out loud here, I'm going to have some level of ownership associated to that object on my side. I'm going to say, hey, Dan owns these IDs, and I should be able to validate that. So then the question is, how do I validate that that's Dan sending the call? I think that's where my head goes first. But what am I missing? Help fill in the gaps, Dan, on that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it either. There's two different sides of it. Like you were getting at, there's the security side of things. How do I validate that you are able to send this thing to me. Two, if I have like a method in a REST controller that accepts some input, how do I validate that input? So those are two different things. Obviously, validating who the person is, that is Spring Security, authentication, authorization, who you are, can you do this thing? So take a look at Spring Security. I have a bunch of videos on my channel on Spring Security lately on kind of the new changes. If you're using like a REST API and you want to validate using JSON Web Tokens, you can do that. And then the other side of it is, how do I validate input? So there is an @valid annotation in Spring. So basically you could mark that with @valid, whatever the argument is that is accepting the request body. So if you have an object coming in that's like an employee object and you want to validate that I'm not sending you a blank name or a blank email address, like you can go ahead and do those types of validations on the input of the object that's coming in. So I guess those are my two answers without completely understanding the question.
I think we answered this one. Hey, when is Spring Cloud function? It's slower. When is the native image? It's right around the corner. I have a repository that I think I'm going to push out. I might push it over to you, Dan, that you can push out, where we've done this example using Spring Boot 2.7 and making a Spring, or using the Spring native experimental module for 2.7. I have an example of that, taking it to AWS and showing it is fast and it is smaller. It's a smaller image and it works. So we'll make that available.
Yeah. And like I said, I am deep in the lab researching all of the serverless stuff because I have a lot of more content coming out on that. So stay tuned for that. I will hopefully be able to answer a lot of those questions, whether it's through videos, and we have a guide that will hopefully hit the Tanzu Developer Center in the next month or so.
Now, another thing I'd like everyone to consider, just from learning, which JDK are you using? We talked quite a bit about Graal VM. Graal VM is also a JVM that you can deploy your applications to. Just by changing depending on your workload, just by changing your JVM, sometimes you can see a performance improvement. One of the other questions down here from John Freddy 15 is like, hey, what else? It seems kind of conservative. We've rebased with Java 17. Just by doing that, we're going to get massive performance improvements. But then also the entire guts, it's a rebase. We've written so much of Spring Boot, of Spring Framework, that this is a massive release, maybe not in terms of new features, but in terms of performance and what you can do, the types of workloads and modern workloads. This is a massive release. So this was a big project, and maybe not in terms of new features per se, but this is a definite massive improvement for the Spring ecosystem.
And I mentioned it a couple times on this show. I mean, what the Spring team went through to make ahead of time compilation work across the entire ecosystem of projects was one of the great engineering feats this team has done. I mean, I'm not exaggerating there. There's just a lot that went into this AOT feature. And so I think that, like you said, the number of features may not be overwhelming to someone. To me, there is a lot of great stuff in these features, these releases, but the AOT feature is going to just do so much. So yeah, I mean, that obviously is the headline, and a lot went into that. So.
And I will also add the way Spring is delivered. It's delivered in different projects. So those new features that you're excited about, that you're looking for, they've been coming the entire time in those different releases. We talk about it every week. Every week there is a new Spring project that's being released with new features. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But if you're looking for something around GraphQL, stay tuned to that project. Look at those release notes. Those features are coming. And it's hard to say, hey, here's all the new features for the hundreds of projects that are being delivered. The Spring ecosystem is massive. I definitely don't have my thumb on all of the projects and all of the cool things that you're looking for. But what are you looking for? help us understand where you're interested in going, and maybe we can help you uncover some of the cool new features that you might be looking for.
Yeah, there's just like there's like a lot of there. I think I covered it in one of these episodes, but there's like a new feature in like Spring Data that's going to be shipped in the newest version of Spring Data that's compatible with Spring Boot 3 that allows you to implement a list credit repository. It's just like a whole bunch of little small features in each of the sub projects make up the larger story too. So
Hopefully that helps. Good, good, good. Yeah, new features. Hey, I have a question. How to properly manage a REST API for response in a more human way? I don't quite understand the question. Give us a little bit more details.
you're talking about like Spring Helios, like being able to be more discoverable, and then yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question either.
Hey, what's the best practice for communication between microservices in 2022? Message brokers or React to Spring Web Client or other, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about gRPC. What about eventing? You have all different types of ways. One of the other ones that I'm actually a fan of is just change data capture. Hey, I've got something that happens over on this data source over here. I don't necessarily need to like communicate it out in 20 ways. Maybe I just want to capture that event and spread it across. There's tons of ways. So it goes to, it depends. Let us know what you're doing today and maybe what you're considering and see if we can help. One of the things that we've done on the show is take one of your questions and Dan and I will both go and we'll attack it from a different way. There's really not one right way of doing things. It depends on what your domain is. It depends on what technologies you're working with, what your data looks like. So there's always tons of options, and that doesn't mean that there's a right or a wrong. A lot of times there's multiple correct ways of doing something. If you've ever looked at the major cloud providers, there are tons of things on the menu. Some of them are just easier to consume. Some of them play better with what you already have. We talked about it with content. There's tons of ways to get there. And there's not really a whole lot of shortcuts. It really just depends on what you're trying to do, and you have multiple ways of doing it.
Good answer.
What's your opinion? Controllers, service, repo layers. Here, even in the architecture, I know that Ted, he does the hexagonal
Hexagonal.
architecture. There's different ways of approaching it, and really, this is where we can kind of get into that architectural discussion. How to be an architect. We're kind of starting to lean in that direction for some of these conversations, where maybe it's more than just hello world. How do I connect from this thing to this thing? How do I connect from this thing to this database, etc. And this is actually a really good question where I'm going to take a note of something that, maybe we need to explore some of these different patterns for delivering things, architectures. What's the best for a team of 100, where I have got more front end, or maybe I have a DBA, maybe I don't. Maybe I want to use JPA, maybe I want to use JDBC. There's different options, but maybe we should dig into that a little bit further.
Yeah, I mean, I've used a variety of them in the past. Really, it depends on again anything architectural. It depends. Depends on the project you're on. Depends on the makeup of your team. So there are some factors there, and I guess I always like to preface that question with like, what are you using now, and why are you thinking of making a switch? Because usually you're doing something now and maybe you've come across something that isn't working, and so maybe it's starting to help you ask those questions. But yeah, we can see if we can. I believe Nate has some type of article on that somewhere, so let me see if I can find that.
I hope that you're getting value out of our answers. Keep the questions coming. This feels really good. Like, these are the kind of things that I wish I had earlier in my career. Rodrigo, thanks for the wonderful questions. How can we know the Spring Boot compatible version for any Spring project? Is there a general table? Like, where do I go to find out? Spring Boot, Spring Framework are released in release trains. One of the easiest ways to figure out what's compatible is to go to start.spring.io. build your project there. Let's go ahead and share that. You want to share your screen since it's already there?
Sure.
Jump over. Oh, it's already there. Yeah, go to start.spring.io. And what you get with Spring Boot, this is one of the features of Spring Boot, is it gives you versions that are known compatible. So grab some dependencies. Let's throw in Spring Data JPA. Let's throw in Micrometer and WebFlux and what else? Postgres. Yeah, just throw some stuff in there. And now one of the cool things that you can do is we can go and look, explore. We can look at that POM file that's generated, and we can see like, hey, everything that's in this POM file we know is compatible with each other because the Spring team has done that for us. This is massive.
Yeah, so you don't have to, in the past we had to go out, pick a version of Spring, and then go, what version of Hibernate is compatible with this? You don't have to make that determination now because the Spring engineers have done that for you. Now, we've made that determination for you, but let's just say I don't care what you say. I want to use this version of this particular project. You can always override these here in a property. You can set the version of whatever project you are trying to use, and you can set the version numbers. So you can always override the defaults if you need to. We just kind of give you those sensible, compatible defaults that can be overridden later.
Yeah, hopefully that helped. But that's the way I do it. I'm never really like stuck trying to figure out like, hey, what's going to work.
Right.
I trust that parent POM to give me a valid version. But as we talked about, some of those projects are being released. Newer releases are coming. If I'm using start.spring.io, I'm getting the latest release version that is compatible with my version of Spring Boot. So it's just a nice kind of cheat code to go in and grab that POM, get the latest version of Spring Boot, and move forward. And that upgrade path has been super easy. So hopefully with Spring Boot 3 going GA, it will be stable. Yes, Spring Native was an experimental project. Spring Boot 3 is completely different. It will be stable, just like you're used to with the Spring ecosystem. I don't know French, but welcome. So Spring 2.7 with Java 17 doesn't perform as Spring Boot 3. No, it's very, very different. That is it's a generational change from Spring Boot 2.7 to Spring Boot 3.x. Tons of it has been rewritten. It's been rebased for Java 17. So I've got to say, I've always been a new Java, so I wasn't that much excited, but I acknowledge. Yeah, unfortunately, there are people still stuck on Java 8.
Yeah.
They aren't going to get the performance boost. They aren't going to get to do all the new stuff that is available in Spring Boot 3. Oh, it looks like we answered hopefully a good question. Ted, I think project code-based organization is important from a testability point of view, which is why I like hexagonal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I mentioned this in a video lately, and that's one of the reasons I love testing is writing tests is because it often points out problems in your code, in your architecture, in a specific method, maybe doing more than it should. So yes, writing tests can expose a lot of these problems, and then you can find solutions to those.
Coder Lady has a question. Spring Security, it's stressing me out. I'm going to go ahead and plug Dan's content. He's been delivering content regularly for months now on different aspects of Spring Security, and there's not one path. It depends. We're going to say that a bunch. It depends. But he has tons of content. If you run into something that you don't quite understand, bring that question here. Check out our previous episodes. We answer a lot of questions around Spring Security. So yeah, hopefully that helps. But we are here to help you. We don't want you to be stressed out. We want to answer your questions. But to get started as a beginner, I'm going to point you to Dan's content, danvega.dev. Tons of content there.
Yeah, check out the YouTube channel. I've done a lot of videos lately on that. I think one of the things that is so stressful is that Spring has been around for 20 years. And so if you go search for something, you're going to find a lot of content. And some of it may be older, some of it may be newer. There's no check mark like a verified Twitter account of what is the right answer, right? So you may get some of those on Stack Overflow if it's like a very specific question, but just how do I do X in Spring Security? You're going to get a bunch of really varying answers. So my thing to you would be to say, hey, bring those questions to us. Let me know if I haven't covered something. But once you start to like chip away at it and learn, like, okay, here's my first step in Spring Security. Like, how do I configure Spring Security? And then how do I add an in-memory user? How do I read users from a database? All these things build on top of each other. And once you start to learn all of those, I think it starts to make a little bit more sense. But if you have a specific question that we haven't covered yet, I'd be happy to dive into it.
You're not alone.
And yes, I've been stressed out by Spring Security. Like, again, we mentioned at the top of the show, Spring is a massive ecosystem. It solves a lot of problems for a lot of different people. And so because of that comes some complexity because it can do so many things. So don't worry, you're not alone. That's what we're here for.
Hello, Spring team. Hey, can we request to the Spring team to not extend OSS support for Spring Boot 2.7 so that we are forced to move to Spring Boot 3? I get it. I'm sorry that I don't think we can oblige on that one, but thanks for asking. I get it. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
What's the best way to create real-time application in Spring? Sockets can be a nightmare, especially when they're a client not stable internet connection. This is a really, really, really good question. And when we say real time, there's a lot there's a definition for real time. And it's a lot of times, I think what we are referring to real time is like in an airplane, that front to back connected by a wire. That's a real time system. The cockpit, the controls for what's happening in the engine, etc. That's real time. When we're talking about distributed systems on things with not stable internet connection, we don't typically refer to those as real time. We'll call those near real time. And there's tons of options. If you've been a part of the show, it depends. But one of my favorite options is not necessarily doing the sockets. We've kind of learned at scale, sockets can be even more difficult. So I've leaned into this kind of event-driven or message-driven approach to real-time, and I do believe that latency is the new downtime, but there are options there. So what I'm going to just throw out there, not the best way, but just something for you to consider, is a message or event-driven approach for a distributed system to get to your near real-time performance. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, but if you're in real time, you need like that constant connection. WebSockets, RSocket, those are going to be your answers.
Yeah, another RSocket. That's another. There's a new guide from our teammate Mario on RSocket. You should definitely check that. Actually, let me throw that in.
I've not gone through that. Yeah, I've not gone through that yet.
Throw that into the chat, and we'll make sure that gets in the
I got a question here. Best resources to start out with Spring Boot, please. So this is something I answered in my newsletter lately. So if you're not subscribed, it's free. What are you waiting for? This is a loaded question, as I said, because as we've talked about today, Spring can do so many things. So I think when you say I want to learn Spring Boot, you need to be very specific with what your intentions are. What are you trying to build? If you're trying to learn Spring Boot to build a web application, great. Now you've narrowed down the kind of learning curve that you have to learn Spring, right? So I would say that start with the guides. We have guides on spring.io in the Tanzu Developer Center. Start with a guide on how to do a specific thing. Like if you want to build a web app and you want to build, say, a REST API, how do I build a REST API using Spring Boot? Now you've narrowed that down to doing that one thing. You can follow a guide, do it, and that will lead you down to ask other questions. Like, okay, I did that. I don't understand how I got a new instance of the service class injected into this. Okay, that is now a Spring core question. Like, the fundamentals of how Spring works. Now you can go into the Spring documentation and start looking for those answers. So I would say start with the guides, start with the documentation. Good place to start. Obviously, I have some content out there. In that newsletter, I also pointed you to a repo on GitHub called Awesome Spring by Thomas Vitale. He has a list of like books and YouTube channels and courses and guides and things like that. So there's some really good content there. So I think that's a good place to start. And then once you get stuck, bring those questions here and we'll see if we can answer them.
Let me throw that up. Just to answer, there is OpenRewrite does have a recipe for Java 17. There was another one up here. Yeah, I added the link to the guide that Mario put out, Reactive Spring Security,
Cool.
with our socket. So check that out. Oh, I can put that up there, right? Whoops, this one. That's there. And yeah, let's keep on going. These are excellent questions. Is it a good practice to proceed messages from message broker to DB and then proceed them by scheduled task? Oh, process, I bet. Process the message from the broker to a DB, then process by scheduled task. That works. When I think of scheduled task, any kind of cron or batch for that matter, I always ask, why not real time? Why not do it as an event? Why not do it on demand instead of something scheduled or batched? But it depends on your workload, right? If that processing that message is going to take hours to do, maybe you don't want to do that 24/7 throughout the day, right? It depends on what that is doing, what you're trying to process. We have Newbie. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the show. Let's see. Here's a question that we might want to have to take offline. In the latest Spring Data JPA, we still can't use DTO projections with paging and specification at one time. Is there a way to do such a thing? I feel like this is doable. I don't know off the top of my head like how to explain it, but I feel like I've already got a working example of this. But I'll go back and ask. We have the experts. I don't know the answers. Dan, do you know the answer to this one?
I do not. No.
But this is something I'm going to write down for us to address. And what you're going to have to do in order to like keep up with the things that we're doing during the week, you're going to have to follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and you're going to have to subscribe to the newsletter, because a lot of these questions that we get here during office hours, we're addressing them throughout the week. We're putting out content on the Tanzu Developer Center and on Twitter and all the places. So yeah, you're going to have to subscribe to all the channels in order to kind of keep up. But I'm going to add this one to my list about DTO projections with paging. A good question. That's what we need. And I'm going to say, I feel like I've done that before. Parsa, I feel like I've done that before. I don't have an example that I remember off the top of my head, but yeah, stay tuned. I want to get you over that hurdle.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and bring this one in. Why people don't talk about Spring State Machine. I'm using it on our Saga orchestration, and I can assume that project is really useful. Again, I think the Spring ecosystem is massive. I get the opportunity to work on this every single day, and I'll be honest, I've never used it. So there's just so many projects out there solving so many problems that I think that's one of the things you're running into. I'm sure there is a really tight community out there around Spring State Machine that would echo your sentiments.
Yeah, I think I don't know why people aren't talking about it. It is useful. It is something I've seen in architectures. I've seen it go. I have an actual reference implementation that I will add to the show notes of using it. But yeah, it works. It's worked in the past. I don't know why it's not getting a lot of love. And I know I've heard things about it recently. But yeah, stay tuned. The Spring ecosystem is massive.
What is the best practice for develop
Developing.
or develop
Yeah, probably developing.
in Spring Boot?
Yep.
Loaded question.
Yeah. Tanzu Developer Center. I think this, right, when we're talking about like, hey, what are we trying to do? How are we going to do it? I think this might be the best resource to go and get some starter questions, some drill down bits on like, hey, what's the way to go to production? How do I test? How to make things observable? How do I package things? How do I build containers? A lot of those questions are answered in detail in the Tanzu Developer Center here. But bring
Yeah,
it, take it for a spin, and come back if you're still stuck.
yeah, and we've gotten this question in the past, like, what are the best practices? And I'd like to put something together for this, but it's just an overwhelming question because, like, what again, going back to my thing with Spring is it solves so many problems. So, like, if we started somewhere, like, what are the best practices when building a Spring MVC application? Okay, that gives me a little bit narrower of a field, and I can start to maybe answer some of those. The other suggestion I would say is when you go out there and search for an answer for something, make sure that you look. So I do this on my blog a lot too. I have a published on date and an updated on date. If the published on date was from 10 years ago and there's no updated on date, maybe that's not something that we're still using. That type of syntax we're still not using, right? Or that may not be the best way to do it. See if you can find updated posts, from recent, because that may be a more relevant answer to your question.
Yeah. Message broker got 10,000 records to process, and DB got only 1,500 threads to support. We do need message queue broker to get it processed rightly. Use Kafka that uses Roxy. You have tons of options here, tons of options in this idea of 10,000 records to process. I am very comfortable in working with systems that are processing millions of records per second, millions of objects per second, and handling that in a near real-time fashion. So yeah, this is, you can tackle it many, many ways. Do performance of Java match Python? What is FRLE? Do you know what FRLE processing is?
File processing?
Yeah, Java's awesome. And as we continue to move forward, the JVM has a lot of really cool things that it can do. So yeah, it depends on your workload. Do Java beat Python? In many, 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 many ways, Java beats Python, but it depends on your workload. Let's keep on going. And I realize now we've had so many good questions that I totally have ignored the clock, and we are way over what we normally do. Hey, when we talk about short-lived application, what does the Spring team really have in their mind? There are tons. I'm updating applications as often as possible, putting out multiple releases. A short-lived application is something that, or maybe we talked about serverless functions, something that's going to go and process its thing and then be done, as opposed to something that's staying up 24/7 and needs to be have a dial tone 24/7. Those are two examples of a long-term versus a short-lived application. How about telling us the way of learning Spring Java? How did your process go? Yes, Coder Lady. I'm going to point you back towards the Tanzu Developer Center. And let's keep on going. Solid principles. Yes, 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 yes. Do we get reactive support for JPA repository, i.e. using JPA for reactive non-blocking calls?
Reactive support. Yes, there is an R2
JDBC.
Yeah.
Yes. Sure. Good question. What you're going to want to look at is R2 JDBC.
Yeah, and even if you go to start.spring.io and pick like WebFlux and then pick the correct R2 JDBC, yeah, you'll get all that support out of the box.
All right. As you can hear in the background, my kids are home and it is time. The clock is ticking. I totally apologize. So yes, thank you for all the great questions. If you've got more questions or if you're still stuck, find us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn, ask your questions, and we're gonna be back next week. So yeah, let us know how things are going for you. Thanks again for all the questions. Any last words for you, Dan?
No, just everyone have a great week. Thank you for all the questions. We will go through these that we still have some questions on. I'm going to go through that Spring blog repo and probably hopefully add some issues and features that we want to build onto that, and hopefully get that pushed out to more platforms so we can continue that story. But yeah, have a great week, everyone. I'm going to enjoy some sun in Ocean Isle, North Carolina this weekend. So I'm excited to get out of this cold weather.
Awesome. All right. See you next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.